success. I can. At least the bank has confidence in me. It's the individual response to social change, because we don't have the institutions, the parties, the unions, to make a social response, a collective response that might have made it different. Some of you know that I advocate as a kind of new socialism for the 21st century, that we focus a great deal on changing the organization of enterprises. We do not have them run by a board of directors selected by major shareholders, that we take seriously the notion that the workers should run the businesses themselves. Now I ask you, if workers had run the businesses themselves in the 1970s, as their productivity kept going up, would they have stopped paying themselves rising wages? Unlikely. They would have kept right on going. And then they wouldn't have needed to borrow anything, just like they didn't need to before that. Would they have moved production out of the country? Unlikely. That would be killing your own job. Wouldn't do that. The whole history of the United States would have been completely different, and probably a lot better. So the solution to the crisis is not this or that policy. You have to go to the basis of how we got into this crisis, and you have to face up to the basic changes that would have to be necessary, not only to get out of this crisis, but not to have the next one 3 years down the road, which is the normal story for capitalism. So I don't think, to answer your question bluntly, we could have a jobs program tomorrow. You know, if I were writing a slogan, I would say something like this: for every dollar used to bail out the banks, we now need $1 to provide work for people. You know, we've helped out the top first. Let's help out everybody else next. That would be quite popular in the country. Teabagger. By the way, I get invited just for tea. Some of you might be surprised. The Tea Party people keep inviting me to give talks and go to their meetings. I haven't gone because I value my life, but nonetheless, but it does show you a confusion. And I think I've mentioned to you, because it seems to get a lot of laughs from people. I was invited and I appeared on the Glenn Beck show. He and I had a conversation for 7.5 minutes in front of 10 million television viewers. And it was a very agreeable conversation in which he and I agreed right down the line. I have this happening to me more and more. And he knows I'm a Marxist, but I don't hide this fact. He does not like Marxists. He made an exception in my case. He really did, and it had to do with personal things. I am friends with his mother-in-law, and so life is complicated. And because of that, I'm on the television. She told him that, and he likes her, and he therefore was in a difficult position, and she informed him that if he didn't have me on the program, he would not be welcome in her house. So I was on. I may go again. Yeah.
To go back to this currency war, what stops the EU from devaluating the euro to counter the devaluation of the dollar?
Fundamentally, nothing. I mean, there are forces inside Europe who are urging that exactly that be done, that the currency war be engaged, and that the euro be pushed down to prevent the dollar from carrying out this policy. So that may win, I do not know. But here are some of the considerations. Europe buys a great deal of stuff from around the world, brings it to Europe, and processes it into the things they then export. The problem with currency is it cuts both ways. If the value of the euro goes up, then the things they buy as inputs cheapen. So they can offset the danger to the price rising for their exports by bringing down the price, since they have cheaper inputs. China has this process too. Much of China is buying inputs, processing them a bit, and then selling them out. So their currency position, they have to look at both sides, because there are societies that both import and export. When your currency goes up, your exports suffer, but your imports become cheaper. So they are working all that out. But that's the struggle in Europe. Do we or don't we? Do we have more to gain? And if they decide that they have more to gain by driving down the price of the euro, that's what they will do. And they have the muscle and the strength to do it. And the United States knows that. And that's why this thing that the Federal Reserve did was desperate. They didn't check with the Europeans. They didn't bring them in on the process. They kind of announced it, and that's why they got this reaction in which the Europeans are basically telling the United States, this is not going to work. The Europeans are in a very strong position, something which American newspapers consistently refuse to understand. The reason for that is historical again. The three major capitalist centers for a long time were the United States, Japan, and Western Europe. Each of them competed with the other. Each of them dramatically found new labor supplies to enhance their competition. The Chinese, entering this, also began doing this. The Chinese cheap labor was their own agricultural population migrating in from the outside. For the Japanese, it was spreading all over Asia to cheap regional places to produce, the Philippines, all those kinds of places. In the United States, NAFTA, Mexicans, Central Americans, and all the other people who come here. But in each of those cases, the cheap labor they found was unskilled by and large. Europe's situation is different. Europe, Western Europe, capitalist Europe, acquired a vast new pool of cheap labor by the collapse of Eastern European socialist societies. Those societies had cheap labor compared to what they were getting in Western Europe, but here's the difference. Highly educated, highly trained, highly disciplined, with heavy experience in industry. Those cheap workers bring high productivity as well as low wages. And that gives the Europeans an enormous edge. And that's going to play out over the next 20 years. If I were to bet my money, as I do, and the money of people I invest, I bet on Europe. I think they are in the best. They have lots of problems, and this could all go way otherwise than what I'm saying. But when I look at it all, and I keep doing this, I've been doing this for years now, they come out in the best position to emerge. And I think you already see the signs of it. In some way, the only Western society that has really come through this economic crisis roughly with flying colors is Germany. If you look at the statistics, it's stunning. They're carrying the rest of Europe as a whole by their extraordinary success. They are a high-tech, highly disciplined, high-wage success story. The crisis in Germany has been much milder than the one here. The one in France is less than the one here, and the one in France is a lot worse than the one in Germany. So, and Germany is the center of the new Europe. It's an enormous powerhouse anyway, and it just becomes more and more the engine of Europe. So I think what you might want to think of is taking a course in German. German is my first language, so I'm enjoying it.
You may have touched on this in other meetings in the past. Why do you think then the government did not take on the responsibility of refinancing all of these loans instead of simply giving the money to the banks, hoping that they would actually do that stimulation and refinancing?
No, but they did. They did. If you look at what the TARP program, all of the other programs, really the most impressive thing the government did was to guarantee almost all the credits. I mean, basically it went into a credit system that had seized up, frozen in 2008. Nobody was trusted. Big banks that had been doing business together for 100 years didn't trust each other for overnight loans anymore. It was impossible for an economy as dependent on credit as ours is. The seizing of credit, the fact that nobody trusted that anyone else's assets were real, could be translated into real money if they needed it to, everything. So the government basically came in and guaranteed all the loans. So that really, the government of the United States did it. When you see, some of you see these numbers thrown around, that the United States government has committed, $13 trillion or 42 trillion. Those numbers are not money that is being spent. That's not even money on bailouts. Those are the numbers of the guarantees. It's what the government could have to spend if all the guarantees it gave had to be paid out. Now the assumption is many of them won't, and that seems to be happening. But the biggest thing the government did, and again, allow me, because I grew up in the economics profession. I've been a professor of economics all my adult life. That means I have had to teach generations of students a load of crap you would not believe. And so for me, it is extraordinarily pleasurable to poke at it. So bear with me. Right? The private capitalist credit market collapsed, requiring the government to come in and guarantee all the debts of AIG. All the insurance policies and credit default swaps they had written, guaranteed by a stroke of Henry Paulson's pen. Guaranteed all the debts of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two great institutions that support the housing market. Guarantee, guarantee, guarantee. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. The government is the only thing that allowed credit once again to go. And on top of that, they then pumped money in. But the biggest thing they did was to provide an absolute guarantee for all these credits.
So why then all of the foreclosures and not adjust the interest rates, for example, on these existing loans that the people were not able to handle? We know that a lot of the foreclosures were actually by design of the people that were actually living in those houses to a certain extent.
Well, I think the answer to that is the culture of the United States. It was crystal clear to Paulson, Geithner, all of those people, that if the credit system seizes up, the government should come in and backstop the banks. The government should give them all the money that they need to get out of it. And as soon as the crisis passes, the government should give them back their private prerogatives. That struck them as self-evident and obvious. If there was enough extra money, they wouldn't have opposed helping people with foreclosures. They did some of that. But that's an afterthought. That's the bottom of the economy. The truth of it is, as economists, and I was trained in the same classrooms with many of these people. I know many of them because of that. I come out of the Ivy Leagues. I went to the right schools to know all these people. And I therefore know what they do know and what they don't know. But that's how they've always thought. They have nothing against poor people. They'd be happy to if you talk to them, it's only the Republicans. It's only the Republicans. Otherwise, we would